All right.
Interesting.
What show what the intention of this whole thing is you challenged me. And so I have gone back to Proverbs 27, verse 17, iron sharpens iron. And so as we're going through this lesson today, one of the things I want you to understand, or I'm going to try to get you to understand, is we argued a little bit over creation. What is creation versus formation? And our definitions never cross. So I want to go through that with you. But whenever you read the Bible in Hebrew, there's two things that you look for, because the Bible is really divided into two parts. First part is called the workings of creation. Now, the workings of creation is basically that, understanding how God does his things. And he'll do it on four different levels, which I tried to explain before. And the first level is Peshat. In other words, what you read is what you understand. The second level, you're going to get to understanding hints. And by hints, I'm saying that there's going to be words that are going to bring to mind another event in another story. So you're going to have things going back and forth. The third idea is the fact of drush. And that's where you, in the midrash, you go through the text. The text doesn't give you all the answers. And so you go to sources outside, and those outside sources tell you some of the possibilities that they believe or they understand that the text could be teaching us. Then finally, the last level is the level where we're going to spend a lot of time today, and that's the level called Sod. This is going to be dealing with secrets. Now, in the idea of secrets, you have two ways of looking at it. So I'm going to go over to the other side, because the other half of this is about revealing God himself. Now, as we went through Wednesday and we were talking, and Thursday we were talking, I told you that the first chapter, God calls himself Elohim. In the second chapter, God will call himself Havaya Elohim. Havaya is the God of mercy. Elohim is the God of judgment. So we're going to find out in the first chapter, he's dealing with mercy, he's dealing with judgment. By judgment, I mean nature has rules, rights and wrongs. And because it has rules, therefore you violate the rule, you find yourself in trouble. In the case of us as humans, if we had to stick to every single rule, I would definitely be dead by now, because I have a terrible time stopping at stop signs when nobody's coming. I always want to ease on through because I've seen it in all directions. But anyway, that's what's going on. Now, now there's what's called hidden ways. And so the hidden ways are, if we're looking at things, we're looking at metaphors, and we're looking at analogies, and we're also looking at numbers. And the reason I say we're looking at numbers is because of what this whole thing is about. And so I want to spend a second and show you, this is all the books that I used for today's lesson. You understand? This is just today's lesson. The first book I'm going to show you is called 913. 913 is a book that is only dealing with the word Bereshit, the first word in the Bible. That's all it deals with. 913 is the value of that word. That's the number value. The second book that I've used is the Zohar. The Zohar is the mystical understanding of what the five books of Moses are actually teaching us. It's written by a man named Shimon Bar Yochai. Actually, it wasn't written by him, it was written by his disciples, coming from discussions that they've had. The next book that I'm going to show you is the book called The Mysteries of Creation by David Brown. David Brown has understandings, and he deals with those things that are very mystical. And this is where you go for analogies and metaphors. This is what book I was using for that. The next book is called Inner Space. Inner Space was written by a man named Ari Kaplan. Now, Ari Kaplan died at the age of 41. He was a tremendous scholar. In fact, they think the reason he died from a heart attack was because God took him home because he was teaching everybody too much. And so we had to slow down when he passed away. But the guy who edited his book, in other words, all it was notes. The guy who edited his book was the rabbi I first met in Israel, and his name was Rabbi Sutton, Avraham Sutton. So I have gotten some understandings from him, and then I've put that together with his book. The next book is the book called Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer is the word for book. Yetzirah is the word for formation. So this is the book of formation. It tells us how God went about doing the creation on the first chapter of Genesis. That's what's going on there. Now, the next two books, one is called The Hidden Face of God. The other one is called The Science of God. They're both written by Gerald Schroeder. And Joe, I told you when you were on Thursday, I told you one of the people that you might want to go look at to understand better the creation story in a scientific way is to go to Gerald Schroeder, who's on YouTube. And there's plenty of his videos there on YouTube. But anyway, these are two of the books that got me going a long time ago. Finally, the last book that I used is the book called 137, The Riddle of Creation. Now, the idea of this book is that as you're going through the science and religion will eventually marry. And by that, I mean that what we find in the Bible will match our understanding in science and vice versa. Right now, they don't match. There's a problem. Science found out that the problem that they're dealing with is the problem of something that is microscopic, below the level of the atom. And this object that's below the level of the atom happens to have a value of 1 over 137. So 1 over 137 is microscopic. But in the Torah, the number 137 appears constantly. Sometimes you have to add a couple of objects together to get to it. But the understanding is 137. Well, the one word that I can use to explain it is the word Kabbalah. Kabbalah comes from the word kabel, meaning to hear, to listen to receive the message. And so in this book, their attention is trying to help you understand scientifically and religiously what this 137 is about. Now, Bobby and I have been reading it for weeks, and I can tell you that it is not the easiest book to read. It's not one that I recommend highly because I don't understand all the science, even though I taught science for 13 years. Science has so far changed since I started that there's a lot of concepts that I have missed. And so I'm spending a lot of time going back and digging through that. So the books is a sefer. Now, when the Bible was originally written, it was written in such a way that those who would read it, and again, reading the Bible didn't happen until the days of Moses, because there was no Bible. Before that, everything was auditory. You learned by hearing, memorization. In other words, the minds of the people back then were much simpler than ours because they could accept what they heard and could do some transpositions. But the book itself then leads us to other words that are related to that. The word for sefer is book. The one who wrote the book is called a sofer. He is one who identifies and writes the book. Now, as he's writing the book and he's writing each of the letters has a name. And therefore, that the reading of it in math-wise is called sephar. All three words have the exact same letters: Samech, Fe, and Resh. Now, in those three letters, it's the vowels that change. Those three letters also are found in another word. And that word's called the Sephrot, and there are 10 of them. And so the Sephrot are important in our understanding. So we're going to talk about God. We're going to talk about him as though he were physically visible, when in actuality, all we're doing is using our mind's eye to read through the text, to put a form to him and a form to us. So that's the beginning of this whole thing. Now, in the story then, I want you to look at the first verse with me. Now, if you look at the top line, it says Genesis 1:1 in Hebrew. And so I wrote you the first line in Hebrew. Now, if you go from right to left, that is how the Hebrews read. We read the opposite. We read left to right. I'm left-handed, so the one thing I have a handy chance to do is I always turn from the back to the front. I just have this problem being left-handed. I think that the original scribes must have been all left-handed people who were very smart like I was, but if that might not be true. But anyway, I just thought that. Okay, so the first line that you're going to read is Bereshit bara Elohim. That's the first part of this verse. The second part is et hashmaim va'et haaretz. Okay, now there are two parts, and I want you to look at that line one more time. Now, I've put colors in there, but the reason I've done that is for myself to help you understand as we go down. Note, the structure is there are 7 words in that line. There are 28 letters. Now, you don't have to count them all. You can take my word for it. But anyway, 28 letters. Now, the value of 28 is mathematically the value of a Hebrew word. The word is kach or koch. And the word koch means power or force. So God created with force our universe. Now, by force, I'm saying the Big Bang. In other words, it came from a object the size of 1/137. And it exploded into space, the Big Bang. And so this explosion or this force was caused by God. And that has been moving out in all directions. Now, if we're going to look at this, I wanted you to read the sentence differently, because I want you to notice Bereshit bara Elohim. Okay? Now, Bereshit bara Elohim is part 1. What it says is, in the beginning, created Elohim. So we understand, first off, that this is talking about time. Time begins when the bang happens. Space begins when it all begins to explode out. So time and space are Bereshit. Even though Bereshit's talking about in the beginning, you have to understand it's the beginning of something. And what is it the beginning of? It's the beginning of time. It's the beginning of space. Now, the second word is bara, which means create. So in the beginning, Elohim, in the beginning, created God. You see, before God's always been here. But the word Elohim is put there for us. We have to understand that he had a name. The name he chose was Elohim. Elohim has a value. The value of Elohim is 86. Again, back to the mystical. The understanding is if you can find a word that has the same monetary value, there may be a relationship. And the word that I want to use is the word he or ha tova. Ha tova. the nature. So in the beginning, God created his name and he created nature. What did nature look like in the very beginning? Well, it looked like E-A-T, Aleph Tav. You see, it's made up of the Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet, Tav, the last letter of the alphabet. So God created everything from the beginning to the end. If I were speaking Greek, I would use the word Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. So who is the beginning and the end? Elohim. That's what they're beginning to tell us. Now, more than that was created, because after that it says Hashmaim, which is the heavens. Shmaim is the word there, up there. That was what they looked at, was above. Va'et, and again, Eretz, ha'eretz, land, earth. So in the beginning, they created God, and they also created our idea of heaven and earth. And actually, heaven is plural, heavens. There are 7 heavens when you get into understanding all of the Bible. And that's through lots of reading that you come to this conclusion. So what we have then are 7 words, 28 letters. The 28 letters give us a word called force or power, which tells us how it all began. Now, in the second part, you have another 14 letters. Again, in each case, when you look at the whole line together, 28 letters, you have a relationship of 1 word for every 7 letters, or every 4 letters, excuse me. 1 word for every 4 letters. Now, he gives us a revealed name, and that's in blue. And he'll give us a hidden name in here. Because you see, not only is he going to tell us about himself, but he's going to hide within that something we don't understand. And so I gave you the red letters there. Now, the first one is a Yud. The Yud is the first letter of God's name, another name. But then after that, it's Aleph, Hey, Vav, Hey. And that name is Ahava. Ahava is a way of pronouncing the sacred name of God and still surviving. That's what we're trying to do. There are only 72 people at any one time who truly know how to pronounce God's name. Only 72. They're called the Lamed Hey. And these men are specialists in Kabbalah. They understand it backwards and forwards. As you can tell, I am not one of those guys. I don't have any Jewish blood in me, I don't think. Although my mom used to call me her little Jew boy because I always read the Old Testament. But anyway, that's beside the point. Back to the last part. We say God created the worlds with Chokhmah. Chokhmah is wisdom. If you go to the book of Proverbs, it tells us about the fact that the creation was with wisdom. God used his wisdom in order to create everything. He also used binah, understanding. You see, Chokhmah is insight. It's fleeting. It comes, it goes. In order to hold wisdom, one has to put understanding to it. And so those two must go together. So let me give you this picture again. This is a picture of the 10 Sephirot, okay? Now, in the picture, there's 3 that are white balls up at the top. The top one is called Keter. That's the super consciousness of man. Below it are wisdom, understanding. So God used those 3 in order to create everything. Now, he didn't need any materials because he simply spoke it into being. Again, the word for wisdom, Chokhmah, has a value of 73. The word binah, understanding, has a value of 67. So if we're going to look at that, what we're going to end up finding is that in our story, the number of words in the account of the first 7 days, that's Genesis 1 plus the first 3 verses of Genesis 2. You're going to find out that you're going to have in those first 7 days 469 letters or 67 words. So in this story, he has already hidden for us the idea that this is to be understood. Now, we're talking about 7 days that were there. And the letter used for 7 is the letter Zayin. In Hebrew, each letter has its own sound, but you can take and create what's called a malui. In other words, you take the sound and you stretch it out. So in other words, the idea is the story of Zayin. Zayin is Zayin, Ein, Nun. Zayin, Ein, Nun has a value of 469 or 7 times 67. This is what God has already done in the very first verse. He's building it all in. Now, I want to go back to the building blocks again, and I want to go back to 4 specific letters because those are the letters of his secret name. So the 4 letters are on the left, Yud, He, Vav, He. I gave you an example of what each letter looks like. Now, in Hebrew, words have roots, central portions, and lots of words can be combined off of those roots. Now, you have a root that's called a prefix, a suffix, and also a middle. In this particular case, the yud is usually used as a future tense. So if I go to where Moses was asked, well, who are you? He will find out that he will be. And he also found out that in the past tense, she was. And then you'll find out in the present tense, he is. And then you have this extra letter. Now the question then becomes, okay, why does he use the word he? And why does he use the word she? The reason he's using both of those is because of the fact that God is masculine and feminine, just as every male is masculine and feminine, just like every female is masculine and feminine. The thing about it is females have more estrogen, males have more testosterone. So therefore, when we begin to rationalize what's going on, women actually have a better intuition than men. Men get insights, they just don't capture them and put them into an understanding. Women have understanding, and they especially have understanding when some male happens to give them some information that they can latch on to. But we all have both male and female. Remember back to the first letter of our story? The letter is Bet. Bet is the second letter of the alphabet, and it has a value of 2. By a value of 2, I'm saying in that particular case, when we look at Ecclesiastes and when we look at all of the other things in Genesis 1, he begins by making day and night, light and dark. He continues on through each and every day, and you see him splitting things into 2. Now, in the very beginning, Bereshit, there was only 1. But once he spoke it, instantly there became 2. Okay, this is complicated, and you may have to borrow this tape, go to Nativ and grab it again and look at it, because there's a lot to it, I hope. So anyway, we talked about that. Now I want to go down to those same 4 letters, and I want you to understand that creation is not as simple as what you would say it should be. And so I've created for you another system of 4 columns: the letter, the symbol again, which you should have those already. Then I want to talk to you about the creative process, what actually happened. And then I want to tell you about the fact that what happened in the worlds, not this world, but the worlds well above this world. And so what we're going to do is watch God think it, speak it, create by a form, and an action occurs. Those are the steps by which any engineer or architect really begins the process. He first has to emanate the idea. Then he creates it in his mind, what he wants it to look like. And then he begins to form it. And then finally, he puts it into action, into a blueprint or into a model or something. So let's go back. So the 4-letter name of God, the incomprehensible name, we would say his name is Ein Sof, but that would be because we cannot speak the other name. I can use the word Ava or Hava'a, Avaya, or I can use the word Havaya, because those are what they call permutations. In other words, I have not defamed God's name. I also can't put any one of those, I can't put those 4 letters together on a sheet of paper, because when I do, I can't destroy it. Do you understand that when your Bible is no longer any good and you want to get rid of it, it doesn't go to the trash can? You bury it, because it's a living document. It's a living thing. And so burial is the only appropriate thing, because the Torah is life. And so as you're going through it, understand. So the 4 letters are Yud, He, Vav, He. The symbols are there. Now I want to go over to the 3rd column, which is called the creative process. Now, in order for him to begin to create this world, first thing has to happen is the law of science, which says no 2 things can occupy the same space at the same time. So in order for that to happen, God did what we would call zimzum. He inhaled. He created a space where man and worlds could exist. That's the contraction of him. Then he began to, again, in creation, he began to expand, not himself, but he began to expand the ideas that he was going to give to us. And then he was going to extend it out. And so we have this now moving out idea until finally what we have are real worlds and real light and real dark and real water and all of the other things. All of them are going to be seen. Okay. Life is good. I've got more to tell you. Going back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 again. I said before, each part of the verse has 14 letters. Now I didn't tell you is that the value of the number 14 is the word yad. Yad. The word yad is the word for hand. Now, if you had your Bibles, you could open up to Isaiah 48:13, but I did it for you. Even my hand laid the foundation of the earth, and my right hand measured the heavens with handbreadths. I call them, and they stand together. In the beginning, God created the heavens with his right hand and the earth with his left hand. Exodus 15:17. You shall bring them and plant them on a mount of your heritage. And it goes on to say, I covered some of it, but anyway, the idea is at this particular point in time, that direct towards your habitation, which you made, O Lord, the sanctuary, O Lord, which you have founded. Now, what he's talking about is 2. But what we're going to actually see will be 1. because you see, he's talking about the sanctuaries. There's a sanctuary that is in what the world called Bruaene, the world of creation, that we don't see. That's the place where God has established his throne room. And in that other part, this lower level in Asiya, we have the physical structure called the tabernacle or the temple. Now, it doesn't exist right now, but it will exist in the future, according to what most people are telling us. Okay, now I'm going to add to that. Okay, looking at the numbers, the Sephar, the total value of the letters, and by this I mean an A is worth 1, a Bet is worth 2, a Gimel is worth 3. Every letter has a value. When you add up that whole value, you have 2,701. That's the value of the words. 2,701 equals 37 times 73. Now, I told you about 73 because 73 is the gematria for wisdom, Chokmah. Now, that's called standard gematria. There's another gematria which says every letter is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. The 11th letter of the alphabet is a kaf. And in a standard book, that would be 20. But in this particular case, it's only 11. So if I look at my words, the value of Genesis 1:1 is the value of wisdom, insight. And again, insight is something you lose unless you can tie it to something. That's the hardest part about learning. Learning is to tie it together with something else. For many of you, I'm giving you something you've never heard before. So trying to tie it together with something is almost impossible for you. Now, those who have been listening to me squawk for years, they're beginning to catch the idea of what I'm actually trying to say. And to be very honest, there will be a time, if you listen long enough to enough rabbis, you are going to hear these words and they are going to make a great deal of sense to you. There is more to them than you can ever possibly know. Now, let me get into another concept. You see, what we're going to learn here in chapter 1, in the first verse, matches up. Well, actually, the whole thing matches up with the 10 Commandments. Now, you'll find the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20 and in Deuteronomy 5, and it begins in number 6, and it goes on from there. But I want you to understand something. In Exodus chapter 1, or Exodus chapter 20, verse 1, there's a statement that goes before the 10 Commandments. That statement is, God saw all these statements saying. Again, that in Hebrew are 7 words, 20 letters. So what we're saying is what happened in verse 1 has a relationship to what's happening here in Exodus chapter 20. There are 10 sayings in the story of the creation. There are 10 sayings in the 10 Commandments. Also, the total value of all of these letters that are used, the 28 of them, will be 1,334. Just a number. Or 37 times 36. Now, I told you what the number 37 was. No, I didn't. I just thought I'd tell you that. Yes, I did. I told you it's the standard value for wisdom. Now, I didn't tell you about 36. And 36 is a conundrum for everybody. Well, it's not really. Because once we get into what I'm going to try to teach Wednesday, hopefully you will understand why wisdom and Leah are put together. So this is going to be Wednesday. I'm going to teach it. I've got Wednesday night classes at Nativ. So I'm going to be doing that. Okay, so the value of Genesis 1:1 is 2701. Now I want to subtract the value of these words in Exodus chapter 20. So what I have left is 1369. That has a value also, which happens to come from Genesis 1:2. And the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. Do you see where the words we read are really math problems? The whole Bible is built on numbers just as easily as it's built on words and letters. When Abraham was first producing the understandings in the book called Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formations, he said that everything was made from 32 bits of wisdom. 32 bits of wisdom. 10 of those are the digits, the numbers, the Sephirot. The 22 that goes with it, well, that's the number of letters there are. So God put wisdom with numbers and letters, and that's how he began to build everything. Now in Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments, there are 620 words. Now, again, value. The value of that is the value of the top Sephirot, the superconscious, and it's called Keter. Keter also speaks of two things. One, the 613 laws that a Jew has to follow, and the 7 laws that are put upon the Gentiles. 7 plus 613 is 620. So in his conscious, he's identified and developed a system that we all are needing to follow. Now in Deuteronomy 5, beginning in 6, we begin to look at the 10 Commandments again, but he's added to it. You see, it's not the same number of words or letters. He's changed one from to remember, to observe. Differences are changing in him. And they're significant, but I'm not going to teach you that. But I want you to know that there are 88 new letters in the book of Deuteronomy 5 that were not found in the book of Exodus chapter 20. Now, again, 88 is the number for the word for brook or creek, Nehel. Nehel. Now, I wrote it down for you so you don't have to look it up, but it's in the book of Deuteronomy, the 9th chapter, and it's dealing with the days of the golden calf and Mount Sinai. And it's a fascinating scripture because in 9:21, it says, yes, your sin that you committed, that's the calf, I took and burned it in fire. Then I pounded it, grinding it well until it was fine as dust. I threw it into the dust. And where did he throw the dust? Into the brook, the extra 88 letters. Into the brook, Nehel. Nothing in the Torah is accident. Everything has a value. Everything has a meaning, a place that it goes. So when we look at this, this is what we have. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And we're now all back together again. Okay, can I stop for a minute? And if you have questions, use that minute to ask the questions. Because I've already talked to you for 45 minutes and I still have 5 pages of notes. Okay, go ahead, Lori.
Well, I've already got 2 things that are making me go, uh-oh.
Only
just
2?
Said, so, well, that's all I can conjure up at the moment.
Okay.
no two things can occupy the same space at the same time. And yet you've taught us previously that time is not linear, that past, present, and future are all happening at the same time.
Uh-huh.
So how can science and scripture marry? Of course, they're not right now, but in the future they should. But I'm still struggling with that.
1/137. By that, that's the scientific number. In other words, the understanding of science can make 3 out of the 4 ways that we identify creation match, which deals with high gravity, low gravity, and quantum physics. But there's another part that it can't get to match, and that's the part that's causing all the dilemma. You know, as science is beginning to look at what is already understood, and if he talks Einstein didn't, he threw this theory out because he says, it doesn't make sense to me. And he's a Jew. After a period of time, scientists, a guy named Fain, came to the conclusion, I need to talk to somebody. And he talked to a Hebrew who was also an astrophysicist. And he began to put together quantum physics, because quantum physics is going down to below the molecular level of substances, down below the atom and the electrons, down below all of that. And that's in that minuscule area that's where we're now science is grappling. But if you read the book 137, what you find out is that God has built the number 137 all through the book of Genesis. It's everywhere. And he's built it through the other books, but the book of Genesis, the book of creation, that book is full of it because it's very significant and it's very powerful. So when we say that no two things can occupy the same space at the same time, the answer is that's a law of nature. If you and I were trying to stand in exactly the same place, what's going to happen?
Yeah,
one of us is going to
be
move.
pushed away. Yeah.
That's right. One of us is going to have to move.
Yeah.
Same thing happened with God. God simply moved aside, created a space in which we are. But we know God is not like us in the fact that when he's there and we're there, we don't bump into each other. Because where is God residing? Not in the space around us, but in us.
Right.
And that place that he's residing is called the soul.
That makes sense.
Okay. Now, we also have to understand the soul is not all completely within us.
Exactly. I just read about that.
Okay.
Well, and you just said in that scripture, and I took your sin of the golden calf.
Uh-huh.
And yet, how many times does that come up? Because of your golden calf sin, this happened. Because of this, your golden calf sin, this, it never got taken away.
Oh, it got taken away, but understand, I ran a stop sign more than a week or two ago. I didn't really run it. You see, it's dark. Is a 4-way stop. There was nobody there. And I just I put on the brake. I looked all directions. And what did I say? Well, I guess I can go. Even though I knew, because I could see the car hiding in the shadows, I knew it was a police officer. Now, knowing it's a police officer, you would have thought I would have double take and I would have stopped. No, I knew there was nobody coming. And so I went through it, thinking that police officer would be very nice and just sit there because I did everything right except for completely stopping. You understand what I'm saying?
You're afraid so.
So the understanding is the fact that there is a penalty even beyond, because as you're moving through this, then one thing leads to another. And so for example, the the case of the spies. Remember, the spies went into the land. What was the result? They came back and gave a bad report. Well, God then does what? Well, if you think it was bad now, wait till you spend the next 39 years in the wilderness and wait until you find out that the first temple will be destroyed on the same day that you came back with this bad report. And the same day, 240 years later, the same thing's going to happen. Imagine how events pile up. And so anniversaries become significant in lots of things. And so the idea of, yes, the sin was forgiven, but that does not mean that we don't pay for it again and again, or at least have it put in our face so that we have to remember it. And I think
Very
that's
true.
the fascinating thing.
Well, and I guess because I'm a human, I would like to not be remembered for my very worst act.
Oh, me too. Except I just told you people all about my worst one. No, that's not my worst, but I just thought it's.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
You're welcome.